One of the teenagers I work with asked me the other day, are carbs really bad for me when I'm trying to get into a healthier weight? So we had a great discussion, and I wanted to bring this discussion here so that hopefully more teenagers will benefit from this. So let me just start by saying I do not believe that certain foods are bad and you should never have them, and certain foods are good and you should have them. I believe in balance of great foods and foods that may not be the best, but they still have a place in your diet and in your routine. This rule also applies to the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not bad for your health. Carbohydrates are actually essential, I would say, for teenagers, especially when they go into puberty. We need carbohydrates to help us give the energy because teenagers have very high energy requirements as they go through the puberty changes or as they're going through the growth spurt. Cutting back on carbohydrates and cutting back on calories in teenagers can actually have detrimental effects. I see many teenagers that come to see me because they're not growing well, or they may have problems not going into puberty, like they can be 14 years and not have periods if it's a girl, and things like that. And that happens when they're underweight. So we don't want to get to that extreme. We also don't want to get to the other extreme when there's too much weight that creates a lot of insulin resistance that can also lead to regular periods, for example, in girls, can lead to prediabetes and things like that. So maintaining a good balance and that ideal weight and healthy options in teenagers in a way that is sustainable, that is what I believe is the healthiest approach. Not all carbohydrates have the same nutritional value. Not all carbohydrates have the same benefits when we're talking about insulin resistance or not. For example, you can have 40 carbohydrates of a food that has little fiber, that has no other protein in it, and has no healthy fat, and you can see a huge spike in insulin. And you can have 40 grams of healthy carbohydrates that gives you more satiety, you're not hungry, you're not craving carbs after it, and does not cause all these crazy pubertal hormone changes that can create more cravings. Now, what are some examples of healthy carbs and less healthy carbs? Some examples of healthy carbs will involve whole grains like brown rice, and compared to less healthy options, which and sugary cereals, for example. If you're gonna have breakfast and you choose to have milk and oats versus choosing milk and sugary cereal, even though those two breakfast options can have the same amount of calories, it doesn't have the same effect in terms of your hormone regulations. You get way more insulin resistant and insulin spikes with the sugary cereals compared to the oats. And I have created a previous podcast episodes where I talk about the differences between the breakfast. You can go and listen to that episode. Another example is if we're having fruits like bananas, apples, berries, all these fruits have carbohydrates. But then if you compare 40 grams of carbohydrates that come from a banana versus 40 grams of carbohydrates that come from cookies or a can of soda or candy, then they're not, even though they are the same amount of calories, they are not the same in terms of your metabolism. You are more likely to overeat if you're having candy, soda, and cookies versus if you're having a banana. Banana also gives you vitamins and it gives you the fiber that your body needs to regulate that insulin spike after eating the banana. The same is also for vegetables. If you're having sweet potatoes or carrots that have carbohydrates and fiber compared to the same amount of carbohydrates from chips or pasta, you don't get the same effect on your metabolism. Same thing if you have beans or lentils. Those are a natural food that has carbohydrate, but along with carbohydrates, there's a lot of protein that you get with beans and lentils. There's a lot of fiber that you get with beans and lentils compared to if you have a can of soda with the same amount of carbohydrates. So choose your carbohydrates in a smart way. Choose carbohydrates that make you feel full, that make you less prone to grab a snack. So by itself, the carbohydrate is not bad, but the type of carbohydrate is what is more important. So what is the ideal way to keep eating carbohydrates while you're still trying to get into a healthier weight? One thing is to choose whole fiber-rich foods, balance your plate, and add protein and healthy fats to those carbohydrates, and your portions, of course. If you want to even have the chips, or you want to have the pizza, or you want to have the soda, I'm not saying never have it, but let's say instead of having one soda every single day with your meals, try to cut back one soda per week, or even cut back in 3 if you're consuming 20 sodas per week, right? Like wherever your starting point is, cut back. If you're eating as a regular thing, like one bag of chips for your lunch and one bag of chips for your snack, then cut back. Even if you cannot eliminate those not healthy carbs, cutting back on the proportion and on the portion size of this can make a huge difference. And finally, try to avoid ultra-processed food. I created a previous podcast, it's episode 61, where I talk about the processed food and how they promote belly fat, which we know is the most dangerous belly fat. Try to eat carbs that are not processed. In other words, they're not in a package, but they are like natural food. No one is gonna get into a healthier weight because they had carbs from lentils or carbs from fruits and carbs from vegetables, right? Most unhealthy weight comes from carbohydrates that are consumed in too much quantity, that is processed carbs, and is consumed like directly without adding any protein or fiber. Now, another question I get asked a lot that has to do with carbohydrates. Is it better to have low carbohydrate diets or low fat carbohydrate diets? So I created a previous episode on this podcast. I believe it's episode number 2, where I talk about is low carb or low fat best plan for teenagers. So you can go and listen to that episode. But in summary, what I would say to this point is choose a style that best fits your nutritional preferences. If you are meat lover, and it may be better for you to go for a low carbohydrate diet. If you don't like to have a lot of fruits and vegetables, you can find some healthier alternatives to still get the fiber and the vitamins that you need from other natural sources, and make sure you get enough carbohydrates in your diet. We know also that carbohydrates are very important for hormonal development. I mentioned earlier that I see a lot of teenagers that come to see me because they're not gaining height, they're short, and oftentimes that's because they don't consume enough carbohydrates, they don't consume the energy that they need in order for them to get taller. I also see a lot of teenagers that can have problems with not progressing into puberty because they don't have enough carbohydrates. So be careful when you're restricting your carbohydrates. Be careful not to become deficient in the minerals that your body needs when you are into puberty. So prioritize whole food options, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes over processed food. Try to limit the amount of added sugars that are in those beverages and candies and desserts, and ensure that every meal has a good balance of carbohydrates, proteins, and healthy fats. Now, if you want to learn more about what's the good balance of protein and fat. I created another episode. I think it's episode number 53. What's the ideal breakdown of carbs, fats, and protein? And also how much protein teenagers need. That's episode 52. You can go and listen to those episodes for more details. That's all I had for you for today. I hope this was helpful. Don't hesitate to go to mylifestyleforteens.com and click on free resources to start your journey as soon as possible. Take care. Bye.